Welcome everyone to the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. I am super excited because I have a friend that is on the podcast today. Celia Clark is with us, and I'm going to read her bio because it's quite interesting. And she has different information than what we've talked about before, which is why I thought she would be super exciting to have on our podcast. Let me get the questions or the things up here. There we go. Okay, so Celia is a food and body image specialist, which they call a therapist in Scotland, where she is. She's working with women, adult women, in her private practice in the north of Scotland, where it is cold right now. She began her therapy career working with addictions, undertaking further training in personal centered counseling, family therapy, eating disorders, complex trauma, EMDR, and internal family systems. She now works primarily through a parts lens, believes there are parts that are invested in impulsive or compulsive eating behavior as a solution. There often have positive intentions. Now, I find that fascinating. Getting to know these parts, we begin to build safety and trust within our internal system and heal the shame-based wounding and internal disconnect that so often drive our challenges with nourishment. Oh my goodness, Celia, welcome. That was a mouthful for me because we don't normally talk about this. And I thought, dang, welcome to the podcast. I am really excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. That was kind of odd for me to have that read out. So it did sound like a mouthful. I was like, oh, okay, actually.
Well, I wanted to
What
represent
intro.
because actually you have a lot of what I was looking at is like you have a lot of history that's similar to mine, the person-centered counseling, family therapy, eating disorders, addictions, trauma, and the things I have not gotten into much is EMDR and internal family systems. So that's we're here really to talk about internal family systems when we look at eating disorders, eating issues. And so welcome. Tell us first, well, you're in Scotland. It's pretty cold there right now, I suspect.
Sure is, Kim. Yes. And we had quite a snow in last week. We were kind of blocked in. We couldn't go very far for a few days, the depth of the snow. But it's kind of cleared up now. It's still pretty chilly. We've got a few more weeks of gales to come yet. It's all very
What's
exciting.
the temperature where you're at?
Oh, well, I do degrees centigrade, so I don't know if that'll mean much to you guys.
Yeah.
But the wind chill is often below zero, so
Well,
yeah.
it's 63 degrees here and sunny outside. So I'm in beautiful
Oh,
Northern California. So I bless you.
amazing.
It's a
Very
whole different
different experience.
lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So welcome. And when we talked earlier, we talked a month or two ago before the holidays, and we talked about what you do. And I thought it was fascinating and really wanted you on the podcast. Tell me, what is internal family systems? Why is it important? What should we know about it?
Yeah. So, well, where do I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I came across internal family systems quite a few years ago. And what really intrigued me was that it takes quite a different view of the kind of model of the mind. And in terms of working with food and body, it's been exceptionally useful to kind of see things through this different lens. So internal family systems is based on this idea that we are made up of parts and that the different behaviors are led by different parts in our system, so different aspects of ourself.
Mhm.
So in traditional kind of treatment around eating disorders or what's often referred to as disordered eating, it's this idea that, it's the ED, this singular entity that's driving the behavior. And
Mhm.
often this, the ED is demonized. It's seen as bad. It's seen as manipulative, secretive. Um, and it's demonized by maybe our inner critic inside, but also the others around us, and also maybe some of the professionals too. And treatment is often about getting rid of the ED. It's about going into battle with the ED, about overcoming the ED. And internal family systems views things very, very differently. So instead of this idea of a single entity, it's actually viewed as a number of different parts. So, for example, if I think about my own history with food, there was a part of me focused on restricting food. It was drawn to restrict food. It wanted to limit and limit the food that came into my body in order to control body weight and shape. There was a part of me that drove my binge eating, but that brought a really different energy from the part who was focused on limiting food. There was also a part focused on the purging. So that was self-induced vomiting, over-exercising. That was very much part of my relationship with food many years ago. That part was also driven to behave in particular ways for particular reasons. And so through internal family systems, we view these parts as different entities, different parts of self within the system, driving different behaviors with different intentions. So it was such a novel way to start understanding our relationship with food. Really different to what I'd been taught before.
I love this. It reminds me, as you and I talked a couple of months ago, it reminds me of other, trainings I've had around parts within ourselves and also parts within families. There's family system parts just within a family. And so it made so much sense to me about the parts. What also makes a lot of sense to me is that a lot of work in eating disordered eating is about the battle. We're going to do battle. We're going to push it down and almost like we have to get rid of it. We have to push it away, push it out. And what I found, and I don't know, I think you're saying the same thing I'm saying, is that what I found is that when it shows up, it's information and it's telling us and you're saying it's telling us there's a part of us that is speaking and wanting to be heard. Am I getting it right about what you do?
Absolutely, Kim. Yeah, absolutely. So if I kind of give examples from my own experience again. So really, as I got to know the part of me that was invested in restriction, what I learned was that the positive intention behind the restriction was that it was intending on keeping me small. So literally keeping me physically small so that I could avoid potential judgment, potential humiliation, potential shame. So there was a positive intention. And although that may not have been obvious to others outside, because often the restriction part is seen as quite destructive, and yes, it doesn't come without consequence, but there was a positive intention there behind this part's behavior. If I consider the part of me that was driven to binge eat, this part was really responding to the deprivation created by the part focused on restriction. So it was attempting to meet that need, that unmet need through the deprivation. And it wasn't just about biological deprivation from the food restriction. It was also other forms of deprivation in my life too. So at that time, I was really struggling in my relationships and social interactions. So there was a lack of connection with others. There was a lack of love. There was a lack of a sense of belonging. And so the binge eating part was moving in to an attempt to meet those needs. So providing me with connection. I was bonding with the food. I was, getting comfort, connection. It was providing me with an escape route when my feelings got too big. It was providing me with that numbing experience. So there were lots of things the binge eating part was attempting to support me with.
So what you're doing is it's like you're valuing it and evaluating it. It's like I'm looking at it going, oh, there you are, part that wants
So
to.
curiosity is the first step. So getting really curious about these parts, because although those were the positive intentions of my parts, some of my clients' parts are driven by other intentions. There's other reasons behind those behaviors. Every system is different. So the first step is to get curious. Absolutely. To get curious, to really listen to what is going on for these parts. And that's what they want. They want to be seen and they want to be heard. And the next step is really about validating. So really about validating that experience. It's like imagining these parts are young children in the same way that you would connect with a young child. You don't reprimand a child for misbehaving. It's about that connection piece, about getting curious. What's going on here? Offering compassion, offering that validation piece. I can really understand why that was so hard for you. I can understand why, I don't know, you might have lashed out or lost control or your emotions got too big for you.
Hey everyone, this is Kim, and I want to invite you to Emotional Eating Solutions. It is our 8-week self-discovery into learning about yourself and food. What is great about joining Emotional Eating Solutions is that you get it for a lifetime. You get lifetime access and monthly coaching calls live with me where you get to have your questions answered. Check out more at feedyoursoulunlimited.com or check in the show notes for the link. Thanks. Bye. So then we want to get curious, notice what's going on, validate them, probably name those parts, and then so how does the work? How does that move us out of overeating, or how does that
Yeah, so the key
impact
piece for
that?
me, so the key piece for me is this attachment piece. So often what's happening, especially if you look at the sort of the restriction part and the eating part. So the part focused on restriction, it's learning to bond with hunger in order to meet need, because that need is not being met elsewhere. The same with the eating part. The eating part is bonding with food in order to meet need, because that need is not being met elsewhere. So
Mhm.
what happens is we step in as that internal loving parent towards these parts, and we begin to create an attachment with these parts, and that's where the healing happens. And once that bond develops and strengthens, they no longer need to bond with hunger. They no longer need to bond with food in order to meet their needs.
Wow. Like
Yeah.
it makes me take a deep breath because that's really powerful. And, it's interesting to me that you and I say similar things. We just use different ways to get there.
Mhm.
And what I also love about this is not once did you talk about calories, not once
Yeah.
did you talk about what type of eating you have, not once did you say any of those things. What you talked about is like, what does food maybe these are my words, not yours, but like, what is food representing for me? What is food bringing up for me? What is food trying
Yeah.
to tell me? Right,
Yeah.
let's go with that rather than how many calories, how do we restrict, how do
Mhm.
I follow this
Yeah.
diet?
Yeah.
Radical difference.
Yeah. And also it's because often people view things like the binge eating or the overeating or the emotional eating as the problem. But through IFS, we actually view it as the solution to the problem. So it's really about getting curious. So this is a solution to something. So what's it a solution to? And that's then where we need to do the work.
Yeah, it's just a radical kind of thought in terms of this is trying to help me. There is help, a helper. This is a helper
Yeah.
within me that's trying to tell me something. And it's speaking in a language that I haven't been listening to, right? I haven't listened in that way to this language. And if I translate it into the language of the internal family system of the part,
Mhm.
then we're talking on the same level, right? We're not
Yeah.
missing
Yeah.
what we're saying. We're
Yeah.
we're coming
Well,
together with
when
it.
we demonize these parts of ourselves, we're creating a disconnect. There's a lack of safety in that disconnect, but actually compassion is the antidote to that critical piece. And once we can really create space for some compassion for these parts, for how hard they are working for us on our behalf,
Mhm.
it's a really different position to take.
It is a different position, and the idea of compassion just so resonates with me and resonates with everyone I talk to. I suspect you probably find the same thing. As everyone I talk to will tell me, at least at the beginning, how much they hate themselves.
Yeah.
Hate, hate. I
Mhm.
hate who I am. I hate based on how I look.
Yeah.
And like what you're talking about is like, that is never going to heal us.
Absolutely not. And I would refer to, the part who comes in to say, I hate this about you. I hate it when you do this. You have no willpower. You're weak. You're, whatever that kind of language is.
Mhm.
Um, it's really recognizing the role that the inner critic, or the critical part, I would call it, has in maintaining the behavior. Because the more critical we are, the more intense those parts who are driven to restrict, who are driven to eat, are going to intensify. The harder they're going to work.
Absolutely. So how do you see this different and more better? Not the right way to put it. How is this different from other approaches of working with food, and like how do people respond to it? Because it really is a radically different way of looking at food.
Yes, and in some ways it sounds very radical and very different, but often when people come to me, they may not have heard of parts before, but as soon as I start using even just, oh, so there's a part of you that feels this, or there's a part of you that thinks this, or there's a part of you driven, there doesn't tend to be much resistance around that. It's like they get it. There's a part of you that wants to restrict. I really hear that. There's a part of you that wants to control your body, or there's a part of you focused on weight loss. But there's also this other part that feels really out of control around food.
It's
And it's like it
interesting.
makes sense to them.
Well, and I think it's because the people that are attracted to you, and this is what I think of with people with me, is like you come to us because you want to look at it differently. You don't want to look at it the way and so when I introduce something to you that to the world would seem so radical, not diet, what are you talking about? Not focus on calories, what are you talking about? Not focus on weight, what do you mean? That when we come to the table like that, it's because the people that are looking at us going, dang, I want something different. And then you introduce this new idea and it really resonates and kind of fits with the schema of, yeah, that other stuff wasn't working. I really embrace this new
Yeah.
idea.
Well, because I think, the focus on calories and body shape and body size is really externalizing the problem. It's keeping us focused on the body as the problem, when actually the body isn't the problem. It's what's going on inside. That's where the challenges are. And for me, the kind of three main drivers that I find are, the low self-worth piece, um, the lack of safety in the body, so not feeling safe inside, um, and also this piece around unmet need. If we really struggle to identify need, to acknowledge need, to meet need, if there's a lot of shame attached to that process, we're going to be left with significant unmet need. And that's where different parts in our system come up with different strategies in an attempt to meet those needs in other ways. And one of the most common ways is through food.
What I thought of, I love that idea. And once again, none of it was about food and calories. And what's interesting to me is that what I find a lot is that the food issues often show up in our younger
Yeah.
years and through lots of things that go on. And like when you talked about low worth, lack of safety in the body,
Mhm.
unmet needs, and I'm thinking, well,
Yeah.
of course, those are those primal, those earlier skills
Yeah.
and competencies that we have
Mhm.
that if there's something else going around, of course we're going to show up with food.
Yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely, Kim. Absolutely. And I think you've made a really valid point there that a lot of these parts develop when we're very young. So as we get to know these parts, we also get to know how old they are, and often they are very young. Yeah. And actually, if you think about the capacity that we had at particular ages, 5, 6, 7, we don't actually have a lot of skills at that age to manage kind of what's going on for our experience. Yet these are the parts of us, these are how old these parts of us are inside that are driving these behaviors. So they really, really need our help. They need a grown-up to come into the room and help them.
And you're your grown up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't need anything. I think of like, I do this thing, there, honey, kind of like you pat yourself on the back
Yeah.
going, we got this, we got this. And so
Yeah.
it's your adult part,
Yeah.
right? Talking
Yeah.
to your kid part that's
Yeah.
been wounded or that's had something
Yeah.
happen at a certain age. And that like you are your healer. You
Mhm.
are the one that can come to
Yeah.
the table and
Yeah.
help reparent.
Yeah, and I
Part.
often refer to it as the internal loving parent.
Mm.
That's who we can learn to become for these really young parts inside of us and meet those unmet needs from way back then so that these parts can heal. Because once they are healed, these other parts no longer need to step in and protect us in that way because their needs are being met.
So
Yeah.
what I wonder about is that I find that when we work on these things, they're really powerful. And what do you do with body image and the feeling that, yeah, Celia, okay, I get the parts part, but like my body isn't okay. Like, how do you work with that?
Yeah, so it's about, again, seeing that there's a part here who feels a certain way about the body. And it's about getting to know that part. What is this part really struggling with about the body? Does all of you feel this way, or is it just a part of you? Because often it is just a part. Who's internalized, the toxic culture, the weight stigma,
Sure.
the fat phobia, all the rest of it. Yeah. And again, this part also needs that internal loving parent to connect with it, to help it to heal. Yeah.
So every part doesn't feel the same way about whatever the issue is,
No.
right?
There's a village in there, Kim.
There's a village. That's so interesting to me because what people will say is like, well, yeah, there's a part of me that knows that's not it's not valuable. That's not, but there's another part of me is like, okay, well then let's talk about those parts.
Yeah, we can look at those, but we can bring parts together. So parts that have conflicting positions. So the part that knows it makes sense that actually, given the toxic culture we live in, that actually it does make sense that there's some internalized fat phobia going on here, that it doesn't feel okay if our body looks a certain way. We are less worthy or less accepted in our culture because of the toxic nature of some of the messages. But there's also a part over here who understands that, you know, don't want to swear, but that's a pile of BS,
Right.
Actually, our worth is not based on our appearance and our body shape and weight. Our worth is about so much more than that. Our worth is much deeper than that. There's a part of us that knows we're actually all born inherently worthy.
Yeah.
It's that growing up in this toxic culture strips of us that worth. It
It
really
also
eats away
makes
at
me think of when you were talking just now, it makes me think of the idea that I really resonate with is that, food has been the way to learn more about myself, eating issues. And this is what I talk about with people and I think about is that it's really not about the food. It's about how my wholeness, my wellness, and that the things that you were just talking about, like it impacts your life, not just about food.
that.
Yeah. And so
Absolutely.
how do you
Yeah.
find that?
Yeah, so that kind of takes me onto the sort of nourishment piece. So
Mhm.
nourishment's kind of this really wide umbrella. People often think it's just about food, but it's really not. There's so many different ways that we can nourish ourselves. Um, and for me, there's two different elements to nourishment. So there's the being open to receiving it as well as being open to offering it. So we need to be open to both of those things. So we need to be open to offering it to ourselves, but also receiving it. And if we have any parts up around that, blocking either of those or both, it's going to be really hard for us to nourish ourselves. And that might be food, yes, but it also might be things like, wearing enough clothes so we feel comfortable and warm enough, or taking enough rest, for example, not overworking, taking care of our finances, moving our body, like whatever it might be in terms of that nourishment piece, that making sure we have enough social engagement, making sure that we're in safe connection with other people. Like there's so many layers to that nourishment piece. So yeah, if there's challenges with nourishment around food, it's likely there's challenges in other areas of our life too. And if we work on any one of those areas, it's likely to have positive influence in other areas too. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I just love that concept of it's the doorway in. The nourishment is the doorway into your soul, to yourself. Like, how am I
Yeah.
treating myself? And it's not just nourishment of what I feed myself or what I do to myself, but also how much do I think I have to nourish others? You said that the whole, codependency part of like, how much am I nourishing? Am I focused on nourishing others rather than nourishing
Yeah.
myself?
Yeah,
Mind,
and
body, spirit.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for many women in our kind of Western culture, we're brought up to prioritize other people's needs before our own, and we're taught to do that very, very early on. It's kind of the status quo. And it's not until we get a bit older that we start to go, hang on a minute, actually,
Right.
this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel okay because actually we are prioritizing other people's needs over our own. So we are leaving ourselves with unmet need.
But that
Um,
also, and that would also be a part, right? That part of me that wants to nurture others, or is that
yes,
right? A
kind of
part?
caretaker part.
The
Yeah,
caretaker
caretaker
part.
part. Maybe like there can be kind of parts who want to fix others. They invest fixing in others because that's a good distraction from kind of what's going on inside of us that might need some attention,
So if
you know?
people could, I love this, and this is so powerful. What might somebody do to start working like kind of they want to explore for themselves what you're talking about? What might they start doing to kind of move into that?
Yeah, so I guess the first part of that word I mentioned earlier, curiosity. So just
Curiosity.
about paying attention to maybe what's going on inside. So if there is an urge to restrict or an urge to eat, really getting curious about what's going on there. Yeah. Parts can show up in all kinds of ways. So parts might show up as a kind of sensation in the body. We might track our parts as kind of where it actually shows up inside. So where do we
Mhm.
feel the urge? Um, Parts can show up as maybe a thought. So it might be that we're thinking about thinking about food or thinking about restricting. Oh, I can't
Yeah,
have that, or I must have that. Really tracking these kinds of things. Other people can actually see their parts, so they get very strong visuals of their parts. So it depends on how your system works and how you might
sure.
get in
But the
touch with those
starting spot that
parts.
you could do is like in your journal, in your time, like, this is showing up. I wonder what this is. I wonder what part of me is showing up that is
Yeah,
really wanting um, to express itself.
yeah,
and
yeah.
and I've been interpreting it as eating or not eating or over
Mhm.
exercising, whatever way you
Yeah.
interpret it. But like, what might it be telling me? What part of me is showing up?
Yeah, really getting curious. Just really maybe open questions like, hey, I see you there. I notice you there. I wonder what's going on for you right now. Is there something important I need to know? Is there something you'd like to share? Really doing that kind of inner dialogue. And it can feel a little bit peculiar at first, but often there's something that comes back. We'll hear
Well,
something,
yeah.
we'll sense something, we'll get some kind of information back. So,
I think if
yeah.
anybody's listening right now and it sounds any bit familiar, this like just do it. Ask the
Yeah.
question. Do it. How might they work with you? What do you do? How could they get in touch with you if they want to learn more
Yes.
about parts work?
Yeah, so everything is on my website, Kim. So www.celiaclark.online. So they'll
Okay.
find information about kind of one-to-one work, group work, online courses. There's free resources there too. Um, if they're interested in reading a bit more about it, I would definitely recommend the book by Richard Schwartz. It's called No Bad Parts. That's a great starting place.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is no, I know this is really powerful. And so I'll link all of your information. You have a Facebook group on parts, there's your
Yes, that's right.
Instagram and your
Yes.
online. So there are lots of ways people can start looking at this. I'll link all of those in the notes to make sure that people can get a hold of you, learn more about this. If it's resonating to anybody, look
Yeah.
into it, seek it out, be curious, right? Be curious
Yeah.
about what you can learn more, right? It's
Yeah.
just a great way to look at food in a different way, which is absolutely what we're all about because
Mhm.
the way of the diets, the 70 plus billion-dollar industry, whatever it's at, right? It's not working and we got to try something different. And this is a fabulous way to not only just look at food, but like your life.
Really get to the deeper root of this,
Yeah.
and it's a really gentle, compassionate way to heal these earlier woundings.
Gentle and
Yeah.
compassionate way to heal the earlier woundings. I
Yeah.
love that. Sia, thank you so much for being with us. I know we talked, it's like 7 o'clock your time at night. And I so appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I look forward to talking to you more and learning more about what you do and more about how
Um,
parts can work more for us.
it's been such a pleasure, Kim. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. We love bringing you fresh content to help you end emotional eating and start feeding your soul. We would appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave a comment about our podcast so others can find us.